A pleasant day. My name is John Ray Cabico Candame from Bachelor of Science in Criminology, Block 3.
And I am John Paul A. Bruno, BS Criminology second year from Block 4.
And I'm Vincent Paraganas Espirito, BS Criminology 2, Block 3.
And we
And we? And we will present to you the primary and secondary source of the martial law.
We have three primary sources of the martial law, which are the Proclamation number 1081 of 1972, a caricature during the martial law by Philippine Free Press, and a video footage of the declaration of martial law in the television. First, the Proclamation 1081 of 1972 was signed and declared by President Ferdinand Marcos in September 21, 1972. The Proclamation number 1081 was the document which contained formal proclamation of the martial law in the Philippines. The declaration issued under Proclamation 1081 suspended the civil rights and imposed military authority in the country. Marcos defended the declaration by stressing the need for extra powers to quell the rising wave of violence allegedly caused by the communists. And the emergency rule was also intended to eradicate the roots of rebellion and promote a rapid trend for national development. Next is the caricature during martial law by Free Press magazines. The caricature shown in the slide depicts President Ferdinand Marcos tearing a piece of paper with the words "Writ of habeas corpus" written on it and saying, "Because of communism." There's also a cartoon version of one Ponce Enrile who appears to agree to the tearing of the paper. The tearing of the paper on which the writ of habeas corpus is written, as well as the statement of Ferdinand Marcos, represent the declaration of martial law in response to the threat of communism. And next is a footage of Ferdinand Marcos while declaring a martial law in Philippine television.
Of the 22nd, last night. I have proclaimed martial law in accordance with the powers vested in the President by the Constitution of the Philippines. The proclamation of martial law is not a military takeover.
The relevance of martial law to the Philippine history and the Filipino nation. The late President Ferdinand Marcos saw martial law as the last and most effective way to suppress and prevent the chaos caused by the communist insurgency of the new Communist Party of the Philippines, or the CPP, and the Rebellion Moro National Liberation Front, or the MNLF. The regime was able to reduce violence, urban crime, collect unregistered firearms, and suppress communist insurgency in some areas while enforcing martial law. At the same time, a series of important new concessions were given to the foreign investors, including a prohibition or strikes by organized labor, and the land reform program was launched. In January 1973, Marcos declared the ratification of a new constitution based on the parliamentary system, with himself as a president and prime minister, effectively making him dictator. Many critics of President Ferdinand E. Marcos saw martial law as a way to extend his term in office and to cover the allegedly ill-gotten wealth. But we cannot deny that without martial law, the Philippines will have become a communist country, similar to what happened in Vietnam.
three secondary sources about martial law. Here are the secondary sources about martial law. For the first secondary source, it was written by Reynaldo Santos Jr. entitled Documents, Marcos Martial Law Orders. Apart from signing Proclamation number 1081, then President Ferdinand Marcos also issued 6 general orders and 1 letter of instruction to fully implement his martial rule. Marcos signed the famous proclamation on September 21, 1972, which put the nation under martial law for over a decade, then ordered the armed forces to prevent or suppress any act of insurrection or rebellion. He then gave out specific instruction to his officials and the public through separate orders. Marcos released the next day a letter in which he called for the closure of privately owned media facilities. In the letter, which was addressed to then Press Secretary Francisco Tatad and Secretary of National Defense Juan Ponce Enrile, Marcos ordered them to take over and control or cause the taking over and control of all such newspapers, magazines, radio and television facilities, and all other media communications, wherever they are. Marcos also released 6 official orders on that day. Here are the documents. General Order Number 1. Marcos to govern the nation and direct the operation of the entire government. General Order Number 2. Arrest of certain criminals. General Order Number 3. Continuous operation of the government offices under their present officers and employees. Definition of cases to be handled by the judiciary. General Order Number 4. Observance and enforcement of curfew hours. General Order Number 5. Ban on group assemblies, including strikes and picketing in vital industries. General Orders Number 6. Ban on firearms. Marcos released on September 23 and 30 a list of persons whom he allowed to carry firearms. The secondary source was written by John Leo C. Algo, entitled Time to Move On from Martial Law. It is clear that many of us do not understand the true meaning of freedom. Most Filipinos are like kids. They do not care about logic. They only understand who is in front of them, and they tend to follow their parent, no matter how abusive he is. We are obviously seeing it during the Duterte administration, whether out of fear, apathy, ignorance, or ego. The sad part is, we have seen this before. Nearly 5 decades have passed since then President Ferdinand Marcos declared the martial law in the Philippines. While he claimed this was done to suppress civil unrest and communist threats, it became glaringly obvious that he simply took advantage of the chaos to create a dictatorship that plundered this nation for the next 14 years. The impacts of martial law are so devastating that we are still feeling the consequences today. By the time Marcos was kicked out of Malacanang, the Philippine economy was in bad shape from corruption and heavy borrowing from other countries. Poverty rate drastically increased, the value of the peso went down, and the country's reputation crashed. Truth be told, all of us are still paying for the trillions of worth of debt today. No matter how hard the Marcoses try to make us forget, we remember that thousands were killed or tortured during this time. Their human rights were undoubtedly violated. Their families suffered, and the dictator's family does not even have the decency to apologize and admit the crimes. For the last secondary source, it was written by Chester L. Hunt, entitled Philippine Values and Martial Law. When President Ferdinand E. Marcos of the Philippines proclaimed martial law on September 22, 1972, it looked as though this signified the abandonment of American values and influence. Indeed, his foreign minister, Carlos Romulo, justified the new dictatorship on the grounds that democracy was not viable in a country like the Philippines, which lacked a substantial middle-class population, and he hailed the Marcos regime as a step away from American ideals ill-suited to a developing Oriental country. As Romulo indicates, the Marcos government is the major shift from the democratic practices inherited from the American period.
Our primary and secondary sources analysis is, despite the military's considerable authority over civilians, the way people live during martial law is highly structured. According to primary sources, the life of a student and a Filipino during martial law is very rigorous. During curfew, no one should be outside their house since the armed forces will take you up if they spot you. Also, individuals can move freely in all directions since the criminals are scared to commit crimes because the death sentence was enforced during the martial law period. We learned in this assessment that we must consider both the good and poor aspects of particular action before giving a judgment. We must not only rely on one side perception, but also on the perception of the other party. In order to completely grasp why a specific action is taken and what the consequences are, yes, we learned in our Hikasi and Araling Panlipunan subjects that martial law is only causes nightmares for those who become victims of it. But it doesn't tell us why and what good things happen as a result of it, such as preventing the spread of communism, which could result in the Philippines becoming a communist country, and the loss of Mindanao due to the MNLF.